Welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. This week on the show, we'll travel back in time to the 65th Academy Awards, which awarded the films of 1992. Dynamic producing duo Ismail Merchant and James Ivory released yet another literary costume drama that captured the hearts and minds of critics and audiences alike, Howard's End. The film by and large introduced the world to Emma Thompson, and featured an all-star cast around her that included Anthony Hopkins, Helena Bonham Carter, and Vanessa Redgrave. But despite its high pedigree and early Oscar buzz, it wasn't able to overcome a decidedly different movie when it came to Best Picture, Clint Eastwood's revisionist western Unforgiven. So why did Howard's End come up short? We'll explore all this and more as we discuss how the Oscar almost went to Howard's End. Hello, and welcome back to And the Runner-Up Is. I am your host, Kevin Jacobsen, and today I have yet another returning guest. Again, back by popular demand. He is one of the busiest men in awards world, whatever we call this crazy world we're in. He is from Gold Derby. He is from his own blog, Exact Change Today. He is now a member of Next Best Picture. He is podcasting all over the place. It is Tom O'Brien.
Hi, Kevin.
Hi.
Thanks it's for so great to be back.
Yeah, thanks for fitting in time to your now very busy schedule to join me for this. This was it's been 20 years in podcast land for me since the last time you were here with Life of Pi in 2012, and now here we are in 1992. How about that?
And wow, time flies.
I know, right? Yeah, so this time around we are going to be talking about the runner-up of 1992, which was, I believe, and some people think it's up for debate a bit, so we'll get into that later, but we believe it is Howard's End. And that was the film that was beaten at the 1992 Oscars by Unforgiven. So let us first get into a quick summary of Howard's End before we jump right in. It is an adaptation of the 1910 novel of the same name by E.M. Forster about two families in late 19th century England, the Wilcoxes and the Schlegels. Ruth Wilcox is the ailing matriarch of her family who owns their beloved country home, Howard's End, and she ends up befriending Margaret Schlegel to the point that she eventually bequeaths Howard's End to her on her deathbed, causing much consternation among the Wilcox family, particularly for the patriarch, Henry. But eventually, Henry starts to fall for Margaret and vice versa. And meanwhile, Margaret's free-spirited sister, Helen, befriends a man of a lower class named Leonard Bast. And Henry gives a little bit of bad career advice to Leonard Bast, and this leads to a huge ripple between the families, and much drama is to be had from there. So the film was directed by the wonderful James Ivory and written by Ruth Prower Jabvala, and it's another Merchant Ivory production. So it was also produced by Ismail Merchant, and it's another one of the three of them, their collaborations together. So the film also stars Emma Thompson as Margaret Schlegel, Helena Bonham Carter as Helen Schlegel, Anthony Hopkins as Henry Wilcox, Vanessa Redgrave as Ruth Wilcox, Samuel West as Leonard Bast, Joseph Bennett, James Wilby, Gemma Redgrave, Susie Lindemann, and Prunella Scales. So Howard's End made $25 million at the U.S. box office, and it was nominated for 9 Academy Awards and won 3 of them, but not Best Picture. So, Tom, what are your thoughts on Howard's End?
I looked at Howard's End again. I haven't seen it in a while. And I was struck at how timeless it looks. It really holds up. It's a beauty of a film. It's strange coming back to it now, because when I first saw it, Emma Thompson was new to me. I had seen her she had small parts in Henry V and Dead Again, her husband's films, and had a very funny performance in a movie called The Tall Guy with Jeff Goldblum, in which it was sort of a comic take on the Elephant Man. So I had this image of Emma Thompson, and to me at the time, the stars of the were Vanessa Redgrave and Anthony Hopkins and Helena Bonham Carter, and this person.
Yes, this newbie.
And,
Yeah.
and it's this person who is stunning in the film. It's a remarkable performance, and one that launched her career. Certainly, she's won 2 Oscars now, and the rare thing of winning for both acting and writing. She won for her Sense and Sensibility. I mean, and I want to talk about the performance first, and then we can talk about some of this ideas and the story.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting. Her Margaret starts out as, I don't want to say flighty, but she is kind of on the same eccentric level, I thought, as her very eccentric sister Helen. And as she begins to really see the real world and the practicalities of it, she really kind of buckles down to the point where once Henry begins to woo her, she really knows what she wants, even though she isn't aware that the family has ignored the deathbed request of Ruth to give her Howard's End. She still is determined to fight for her family, and for her, family comes first, as is true for Henry. So it becomes an interesting battle of wills, and Thompson rises up to Anthony Hopkins' level, performance-wise, and I think exceeds it. It's a very, very deserved Best Actress win against some much more well-known competition.
Yeah, I completely agree. I love Emma Thompson in this movie. I have to say that I've been really consuming the Emma Thompson, early 90s to mid 90s costume dramas that she was in, one after the other. So this was really the start of it. Ironically, this is the last one I'll be watching here since I'm going backwards. But I will say that it's probably my favorite of all of those performances between that, The Remains of the Day, and Sense and Sensibility. She just has this really warm openness and this connection with everyone around her that I find just so innately, it draws you in, you know?
Yes.
And I think that's part of her character, and it's part of the sentiment of the book Howard's End, which has the tagline or the common phrase only connect, and that's really what she is able to do between a lot of different relationships with that sense of openness. So for me, I was just going to say that I really didn't know how I was going to feel about Howard's End because I knew about its reputation going into it, on both sides of how people feel about it, which is some people really, really connect to it and are emotionally invested. Other people are like, this is just another costume drama that leaves you a little bit emotionally empty and is somewhat cold and is a bit too prestigey and maybe pretentious. But for me, it was definitely the former watching this. I find all of the different values that people have and how they all conflict with each other to be really fascinating and also incredibly like resonant even with what we are dealing with like in America politically today, just in terms of the different ways you can be a person and go about the world and these different ideals, because this is also a movie that deals with the social classes, and I think it provides an interesting tapestry of all the different ways that you can live your life and how those conflict with one another. I also just want to mention that the production design is one of the most deserved wins for that category of best art direction, for which it was known as at the time. Now it's production design. Beautiful, elegant sets, so meticulous as a lot of Merchant Ivory films are, obviously, but I was really taken by it. I was taken by the cinematography, which is so lush, and the outside of Howard's End alone is just filmed so romantically almost. Like you just want to be there. So beautifully written, beautifully designed. It's just top to bottom, I think, really exquisite is the word I would use.
I agree. I agree. It's before we leave production design, I just wanted to point out and give kudos to whoever, to the designer one, who designed the interior of
Mm.
Howard's End, because the shelves and the walls are filled with paintings and bric-a-brac, and you really feel that they all have meaning to the family.
Hmm.
And that is when that's an element that sometimes is ignored for showiness, and this was all done for character.
Yeah. And let's also talk about that amazing sword.
Yes.
Which, by the way, when I was watching it, I'm like, first of all, that's pretty cool. And I'm sure that's going to come into play somehow. But even if it doesn't, that's like a cute little quirk. Like the Schlegels just happen to carry this sword with them wherever they go, you know? But we'll get into the what happens with the sword by the end. But I just wanted to get your take as well on some of the different ways that all of these characters interconnect and whether you think those are effectively portrayed in the film because it's a very complex novel that they're drawing from lots of different relationships.
Yeah.
So what is your take on how like this whole story kind of unravels starting with a inciting incident really of first of all Ruth and Margaret befriending each other, but also Helen having this chance circumstance where she takes the umbrella of Leonard and how that really creates this really crazy butterfly effect that affects pretty much everyone's lives.
Yeah, it's one of those amazing chance things that happen that
Mm,
wind up changing your life. It's interesting. Early on, Helen really was sorry that she took the umbrella. Tells Leonard that, but she really doesn't give him the time of day in the beginning. And then, but there's something about Leonard that sticks in her mind. And I thought, well, okay, that's interesting. Let's see where it goes. And when they pick up again with Leonard in his kind of down class apartment with this slattern of a girlfriend, Jackie, who is both needy and a pain in the butt. uh, I'm wondering, this just seemed they were spending a lot of time with this guy. Like,
right.
what's
Exactly.
going on here?
Yeah.
And what's with her?
Yeah, what is up with her?
Yes, well, we soon find out what's
Yeah.
up here.
Oh yeah.
Nearer the end of the story, and that
Hmm.
becomes a key element in the narrative. But it's just from that one taking the umbrella incident that all of this tumbles out, which I thought was a really remarkable device, and that Forster created, and Ruth Prowler Jabala really made cinematic.
Absolutely. And I think it really does actually unfold in a way that feels realistic, even if it's, a series of plot points that happen. I feel like they all make sense for the characters because they are so well written, and and you feel like you know them even from their introductions. You get a sense of who they are. And even someone like Margaret, who, as you said, kind of evolves over the course of the film. I think you still understand all of the choices that each character makes because they are so well written and they are always in keeping with who you expect them to be.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah. So, as far as other performances I wanted to get to, I do agree Emma Thompson is It's like a Star is Born performance, for lack of a better phrase. Obviously, that's Curly in the moment. But yeah, she's radiant, and I do agree that she deserved this Best Actress prize. But I also have to say the whole ensemble is really top to bottom pretty great as well. I do like Helena Bonham Carter a lot. I think this is such such a great role for her because she is like that bohemian oddball in real life, always kind of going outside the norm a bit, questioning some things, and others are like, why is she doing those things? But she is just this independent spirit.
She's kind of a unique character in costume dramas.
Yeah.
She seems very contemporary,
Mm-hmm.
but she never loses the period.
Right.
And that's a particular skill she has, and that she's never lost. Uh,
Yeah.
I mean, I'm very anxious to say next season she's going to be Princess Margaret on The Crown.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, buckle up for that.
Yeah, that's gonna be fun.
But she has sustained that particular variations of that character and built an entire career around it that's absolutely unique. There's nobody like Helena Bonham Carter.
I know. So really perfectly cast for this. And Anthony Hopkins, I think, is also very well cast for this role of kind of a pent up conservative patriarch of this family, this rich family. Obviously, he would not necessarily play the same character in The Remains of the Day, but I think has similar skill sets, of being very pent up emotionally, that kind of respectable English gentleman sort of deal.
Yeah, his servant in The Remains of the Day seemed to me very buttoned up,
Yeah.
and but I didn't feel that there was any. Well, I'm going to take that back because there is kind of an emotional explosion near the end. But Henry in Howard's End is very different, and I think that Hopkins plays him a different way. He's wealthy, but he's almost afraid to be generous.
Yeah.
He wants to protect his family, even though he doesn't always respect his family. But even when people who really need help come along to him, he either doesn't help or helps in the wrong way, which
Yeah.
in his case turned into a financial disaster.
Right. And he kind of has that line towards the middle where I don't remember exactly what it was, but he was saying how the poor will remain poor. Essentially, what are you going to do about it?
Yeah, yeah, and that's his attitude towards the whole thing.
Yeah.
They're very much like our current administration.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I mean. I feel like there are these really interesting parallels where, as the story goes along, we have Margaret becoming more connected to obviously Henry and the a little bit more conservative style compared to how she was brought up. And she kind of bridges that gap in a really almost like a centrist way to bring it into like the political aspect. And then we have Helen, who's like more or less a far left, like social activist of sorts, who is openly criticizing her sister for becoming more like wanting to bridge the gap and things like that. So like I said, just I think really it really resonated with me looking at today. And I feel like it really shows that these conflicts have been going on in every country for as long as we can imagine. And
Yeah.
it will just keep repeating itself over and over. Everyone will always have these different ideals for how they think the world should be run. And it's going to be hard to really come together eventually,
Yeah.
So
The genius of Forster's story that he was able to utilize the most universal traits that we all have that is now continued, several centuries later.
yeah. And I wanted to get to a few interesting plot points because we haven't talked too much about the relationship that formed between Margaret and Ruth in the beginning, where we have Vanessa Redgrave, who I think is so good in this movie.
God, I'd forgotten how good she is.
Yeah.
Gee, she is terrific.
Yeah. And it starts with the amazing opening, which is like this wordless sequence with music. And it's just her walking around outside of Howard's End, just kind of in nature. And her dress is like billowing behind her. And she's just like one with nature, essentially. But she really kind of just floats through this movie as this sort of ethereal presence.
Yes.
And even when she's not on screen, I feel like you can really sense the history of her still. And I think she's a really complex character of her own because it is interesting that our introduction to her is outside and outside the context of her family,
Yes.
where she is walking around. She is very one with nature, as I said, but then, she looks into this house and her whole family is like having this lively discussion, and she is like grateful for them, and I think she does love them, but I think at the same time there's a little slight bit of a disconnect there. I
She's not
think.
really feeling a part of him.
Right. Right. And that's how it really sets up like, the eventual plot point of her giving Howard's End to someone outside of her own family who she like just became friends with a few months ago. So, yeah, I think it's all really well plotted out.
Yes.
There are no accidents in this movie, which I like.
No.
Yeah.
Even one moment you're thinking, okay, what's this mean? You
Yeah.
really have the confidence that okay, this is going to pay off, and it
Definitely.
always does.
Yes. And the moment where after Ruth has passed, and she bequeaths Howard's End in the pencil written note, and how the Wilcox family is reading it and discovering that, oh, we no longer have Howard's End here, like, but also it's in pencil, so is it legally binding? I don't know.
Yeah.
And their
It, it,
discussions that they have, and the way that it ends with them just throwing it in the fire and pretending it never happened frustrated me to no end because this is the
yes.
kind of thing in real life that just pisses me off. I'm just saying, like, watching that, I was just like, oh God.
No. But it is interesting because another screenwriter might have just cut to, oh, this is no good. Toss it in the fire
Right,
and
that's true.
clean. They take a good long time.
Hmm.
Also introduces the kids,
Yeah.
uh, and so that we get to see them as they really kind of hash this over.
Hmm.
Because there is a side of them that wants to respect their mother's wishes, but mother could not have wanted to do this to us.
Heavens no.
No. But it's useful in that it's a plot point, but it's also a character introduction point.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's
That
what every scene really is.
really is.
Yeah.
God.
Hmm. And let's talk about the sort of wooing of Henry to Margaret. Did you like the way that unfolded? Did you feel the chemistry between them eventually?
Eventually, but it's interesting when the proposal comes,
Mm.
it's on a staircase, and Henry is situated at the top, and Margaret's farther down. And he almost treats it like a business proposition,
It is.
which it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
Uh, but the romantic element to it is not introduced right away.
Hmm.
It is just a bargaining thing.
Yeah.
You want this, I need companionship. I'm offering
Why
you this.
not?
All
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. And it's like he's just kind of wooing her with these standard business things, almost just like bringing her out to a fancy restaurant, showing off his properties. Like, here's who I am. I have a lot of money.
Yes.
Yeah. And I feel like, in a way, I think you do get a sense of his character beyond what he really could have been, which is just a stereotypical two-dimensional, stiff upper lip British conservative guy. But I think you also get the sense of himself and his self-doubt when it comes to his personal life, because I think he goes through a lot of different emotions when they're reading the bequeathing to Howard's End. He goes through all these emotions about what to do and reckoning with the idea that Ruth would actually do this, prevent her own family from having this property. And then later, I think, the way he kind of stumbles over a proposal in a sense, I just found that to be kind of endearing, but also a really good character detail.
It's interesting. I mean, I had the idea about it being simply a business situation, but later on there are moments when they're actually really tender with each other, and it's like, whoa, wait a minute, does he really have feelings for her? And that's the beauty of Hopkins' performance, and also Jeff Fowler's writing. Uh, it does create questions in your mind, and it draws you into their situation. Hopkins is an actor that probably he may have given two-dimensional performances before, once in a while, but I can't think of very many of them. He has such enormous skill to develop characters that might, in other people's hands, be just two-dimensional.
Right.
And his Henry is layered in unexpected ways. And when the final showdown comes, and Margaret has to choose between staying with Henry and going to tend her sister, it's very interesting how that is developed and what the result is. You kind of, even though Hopkins is a bit of a cad, uh, you kind of feel sorry for him.
A little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's Hopkins, I think.
It really is, yeah. And it's maybe a little bit surprising that he doesn't get a nomination for this. This is 1 year after The Silence of the Lambs. I don't know if he would be lead or supporting for this. I think he kind of straddles the line, but
yeah, if he was lead for Silence of the Lambs, he'd be lead here.
well, yeah, that is fair. But I also just wanted to talk about the Leonard Bast of it all, because I think he's really someone who becomes a thorn in the side of a lot of these characters, for better or for worse. And I think the story does a good job of presenting another interesting real world situation of someone who maybe you gave bad advice to, or who you had some sort of a conflict or a bad relationship with, and that person coming back later in life to kind of haunt you in some respect.
Yeah.
I think that's something that people have I've even had to deal with things like that, just saying. I'm not going to get into that, but the idea of someone who you had that sort of odd connection with that went wrong, and that person coming back to haunt you in a way, and you're just like, how do I deal with this person in the right way? And I think that's clearly what Margaret and especially Henry have to deal with Helen consistently, bringing him up again, and even bringing him to a wedding, for example.
And it's wonderful. There's a wonderful moment when, at the wedding, Margaret sees Leonard and Jackie and Helen, and she knows, oh God, this is trouble. And she tries to go out and put out the fire, yet she's needed back at the wedding with Henry, and she knows that Henry is going to explode when he sees these people, and she's trying to manage all of this stuff while still being polite to everybody. She doesn't have a harsh word to say about anyone in this film.
Right.
Really wants to make everybody happy.
Yeah.
And it doesn't always work out that way.
Exactly. Yeah.
But it's interesting with Leonard. I didn't want to leave Leonard quiet, because early on, when Helen and Leonard get together, they have a little boat ride on a lake, and it looks pastoral, and you think, oh, well, he's going to turn out to be the real love of her life. And you've seen the scene a million times.
Yep.
And it's like, okay, I know what's going to happen. And then it doesn't. It's like,
certainly not. Yeah.
Leonard's role in this turns into something entirely different.
Yeah. Which is credit to the writing, I think. Yeah.
Writing, once again.
Yeah. And when it gets to that ending where there is a big confrontation where Leonard goes to visit everyone at Howard's End. Pretty much everyone is at Howard's End at this point. And the sword gets brought out. Finally, the sword is here. And one
But
of
not in the way you might think.
right, because I think it's Charles, the son of Henry, who confronts him and kind of not necessarily jabs him with a sword, but kind of like with the blunt end of it
Mhm.
pushes him
Yes.
into this bookcase and it just falls on top of him in this very like melodramatic scene that I found really entertaining, honestly, in like a darkly humorous way. But
Because you're dying for Charles to get his comeuppance.
oh yeah, yeah. Eventually, how it ends. It goes with Charles eventually going to jail for 3 years. Meh. I don't know if that exactly fits the punishment there, but by the end, it's I think a year later or so, where
Yes.
they're all reconvening, and Margaret finds out the Ruth bequeathment now, like a year later.
Mhm.
She has not been told at all up to this point that it was in Ruth's interest to give it to her. And she goes through a lot of emotions. And this is all based on her overhearing it from that dingbat wife. um, she ends up overhearing it. She confronts Henry about it. And they have an interesting sort of resolution where it seems like Margaret kind of forgives him in a sense, like it's all water under the bridge, maybe, but they're still also going to have those issues between them in their marriage. Where,
There's never going to be a full amount of trust.
right, right,
And, it's interesting. Henry just kind of dismisses it. Oh, yeah, that happened.
yeah, but that's like a huge moment,
Yeah.
in someone's life.
It is. And that is really near the end of the film. And that there's a big final shot with Henry and Margaret on one side of a road, and then Helen and her two children on the other side, and the camera pulls back. And as it was pulling back, I thought, God, this movie could have been made yesterday. It just seems so fresh and so smart.
Yeah,
Uh, God. And there's nothing dated about it. There are some period pieces I see that really show their age. This doesn't.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. And first of all, I should say it's on Netflix for anyone who wants to see it. But just watching it on Netflix on a streaming service, sometimes the bit rates aren't always great with that sort of thing. Sometimes it gets a little buffery and stuff, But the point remains, just watching it, it looks gorgeous. Like, I was really stunned by so many shots in this, not only from the outside exteriors, but also just the way shots are composed inside and all the production design. It looks so beautiful and timeless. And like you said, like it really feels like it could have just been a modern movie and you wouldn't have known the difference.
A couple of years ago, it was remastered,
Yeah.
and there was a brief theatrical run that
Hmm.
a week or two somewhere. I suspect with the beauty of this Netflix presentation, I think this is the remastered version.
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, because it really does look like 4K.
Yeah. It's a real visual treat,
Yeah.
and if you have Netflix, I'd highly recommend a lovely evening sitting down watching this.
Yes, it is a lovely evening. That's a good way of describing it. Do you have anything else about Howard's End before we get into its Oscar success and failure?
Uh, just the complexity of the characterizations. It could have taken some shortcuts and saved about 10 or 15 minutes off the running time, but it would not have been worth it. It flies faster than if were shorter,
Yeah.
because you can just roll with it. And it takes its time to tell its story at its own pace. Yet at the same time, all of a sudden, oh my gosh, all this time has passed. It just feels like I won't say it flies because it is deliberately paced, but it's beautifully done, and you'll never notice the time going by.
Exactly. I totally agree with that. It's like, I think it's 2 hours and 20 minutes, but I really do think it really flies by because it constantly engages you with every single scene because there's so much even, on the surface, it looks gorgeous, as I've said multiple times already. But just beyond that, there's so much in every single scene that you could be paying attention to any one character, and they're all dealing with their own personal issues and struggles with people. So very much worth your watch if you haven't already. Just try to engage with it, and I think you'll really take a lot out of it.
Yeah.
So that's that. So when we come back, we'll be talking about why Howard's End did not win Best Picture, because it lost Best Picture to a movie called Unforgiven.
Will you come with me? I want you to see it, Miss Schlegel. We never discuss at Howard's End.
But you should. Discussion keeps a house alive.
We have here a note purporting to be in your mother's handwriting. It says, I would like Miss Schlegel to have Howard's End.
Oh, hello.
But I'll keep my eye on those Schlegels.
Do you ever get lonely, Miss Schlegel?
Why should you worry about me?
Because we like you.
He's taking a mother's place.
I could scratch that woman's eyes out.
Aren't you going to say hello?
Do you know Mrs. Beth?
No, I don't.
Why can you not be honest for once in your life?
Everything's got spoiled for you, hasn't it?
And we're back. So now we are going to talk about why Howard's End lost Best Picture to a movie called Unforgiven. First off, Howard's End was nominated for 9 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director for James Ivory, Best Actress for Emma Thompson, Best Supporting Actress for Vanessa Redgrave, Best Adapted Screenplay for Ruth Prower Jabvala, Best Art Direction, Best Cinematography, Best Costume Design, and Best Original Score. And I walked away with 3 of those: Best Actress, Best Adapted Screenplay, and Best Art Direction. All very well deserved, in my opinion. And before the Oscars, Howard's End won at the BAFTA. And it didn't really do that great in terms of Best Picture with other major awards, but it was kind of an all-over-the-place race, honestly, where there didn't seem to be any front runner. And that's because, Unforgiven, which is our Best Picture winner, only won the DGA as far as prominent wins heading into the Oscars. Scent of a Woman won at the Golden Globes for drama. The Player won the other Golden Globe comedy, and it also won the WGA for adapted, for that matter. And The Crying Game ended up winning the PGA and the WGA for original screenplay. So all over the place.
Oscar Wilde just had a real hard time that year.
Yeah, I can imagine. but it's interesting because looking back on the few predictions I could find on the internet from 1993, early 1993, a lot of them did still say Unforgiven was going to win. So we can get into some of that. But why do you think Howard's End was not able to win Best Picture here?
My guess. Well, it's let me back that up by just reiterating what you're saying about what a crazy year it was. Because you think the next year it was Schindler's List.
Right.
Everybody knew it was going to be Schindler's List. There was no question about it.
Yep, talked about it last week.
yeah. And not to spoil next week's episode, but everybody knew Dances with Wolves. I mean, it's Tarantino fans may have wanted it to win against Schindler's List, and Scorsese fans may have wanted Goodfellas to win, but it was never going to happen. 92, though, was very strange. There was not a single film that steamrolled down the pike like that. And it you think of if you think of what eventually turned out to be a two-picture race, Unforgiven versus Howard's End. Howard's End was released in March, which would be almost unprecedented these days in terms of a film getting the kind of Oscar glory that it did. And Unforgiven was basically designed as a Warner Brothers programmer, for lack of a better word. It got stuck in an August slot. It's one of those pictures that I think they may have assumed that, okay, we can take some theaters that had June pictures that are done with their runs or July pictures that are dying, and we could plug this Western in, and it'll last maybe for 3 or 4 weeks and then be out on DVD, 2 months later.
Yep.
And we can forget about the whole thing. Didn't happen that way.
No.
And it's no fault of Howard's End that it didn't win the Academy Award. It didn't have, as you had said, a lot of precursors, but of course the precursors were all over the place. And Unforgiven wound up surprisingly continued to be on the back burner. It was always a picture that was there, and it had a 96% Rotten Tomatoes rating, which for a August programmer Western is extraordinary. And that was because of the quality of the film. And this probably can't be denied, but Clint Eastwood's a hometown boy.
Right.
And he's Hollywood establishment that, if you think back in his career, he began as sort of a lightweight. He got the Universal to pay for him directing Play Misty for Me in, I think, 1967. And it turned out to be a neat little B picture. And as the years went on, he would create these Westerns, and they were all good. You could see that he was really influenced by some of the great Western directors, John Ford, Howard Hawks, Sergio Leone in particular, with whom he had worked in the Dollars series and The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. He learned a lot from that. And boy, oh boy, I think there was, I don't say a grudging respect, a real respect for Eastwood as a director. But he had never done anything quite at the level of Unforgiven.
Yeah.
And to give Unforgiven, which is also on Netflix, kids. So do yourself another favor. Do 2 nights, Howard's End and Unforgiven.
Yeah, double feature.
And the runner-up is.
Yes.
But from the very start of Unforgiven, it takes its time too. It signals in the first 5 minutes in something that really could have been a horrendously exploitational scene. Cowboy slices up the face of a prostitute in a brothel. Could have been done in a very ugly way. And how Eastwood does that scene, it's almost, you don't ever see the actual event. It's all in your mind because it's the way he cuts it. And I think that's typical of what goes on in Unforgiven. It's a classic Western, not in the sense of classic in terms of Hollywood history, although I think it is, but I think it's done in the style of John Ford films or Sergio Leone films. There is thought put into every sequence. It's not just bang, bang, move on. And, he had done work like that, but never in such a sustained basis. And by the end of Unforgiven, I was just sucking in my breath. It's like, my God, that's beautiful.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually really like Unforgiven as well. This is another race where we have 2 movies at the top here that I really respect in very, very different ways, but in also similar ways. Like you said, it is very well shot. And I also respect the way that it is kind of this revisionist Western of sorts, where it doesn't just go for the good guy and the bad guy and, needless exploitive violence. It makes you feel all these things. All the characters are shades of gray. It really, I think it elevates itself slightly beyond the standard Western, which is, I think, part of why it resonated so much with critics and audiences, maybe, and obviously Oscar voters. I think they got a sense that this is a Western that could have easily just been another Western by Clint Eastwood, but it was so much more, which I think voters really like the sort of element of surprise and the sense that they've felt their expectations have been exceeded in a way.
Yeah.
So
and that's no accident. I mean, he could have cast this with, B-level actors. Instead, he gets Morgan Freeman and Gene Hackman, won the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor for this performance.
Yeah.
And a great performance.
It is. It's hard to deny that one.
Talk about shades of gray.
Yeah.
His little Bill is just, you never quite know what to think of him. And even at the end, you kind of feel for this guy.
Exactly.
He's wrong, but he thinks he's right.
Which is the best kind of character.
That's what you want.
Yeah.
And I suspect it also, got a lot of the votes of what Ann Thompson calls the steak eaters among the Academy membership. The sound people, the editing people, the everyday folks who make these movies to make a living, not necessarily to enrich themselves. They put in the yeoman's work every day. And this, I think, was of the potential films, the one that might have spoke most directly to them.
Oh yeah, absolutely, clearly. And this was it a mainstream studio film? I think it was.
It was Warner's, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So
he'd been doing a lot of his Westerns and they just,
exactly.
Oh, we got a hole in August, let's plug this thing in.
Yeah.
This thing turned into something else.
Yeah, and it became the number 11 movie of the year, made $101 million, which is really amazing for a Western
at that time.
Yeah.
And among reissues, and it was reissued several times, it ran in theaters almost a year.
Wow.
Till July of the next year. And that again is unheard of today.
Exactly. Yeah. But, you look at that and you also have a lot of interesting indie players in the race, more or less for the first time, or at least one of the first times, because Howard's End was an indie movie. It may look incredibly expensive and beautiful, which it is, but it was made with $8 million and it came from an independent studio from Britain. And then we also have something like The Crying Game, which is our old friends at Miramax.
This was one of the first big Miramax
Exactly.
play.
Yep. So a lot of indie studios starting to crash the race at this time, but it ultimately goes to the old kind of studio person who, Clint Eastwood, as a lot of people were saying at the time, it was quote unquote his time. He had earned enough respect up to that point. He was a really good company man, reliable and respected, and it had all of these different elements in addition to the quality of the movie. I think made it really undeniable.
Yeah, it was yes, it was his time, but it was not his time it was not given the Oscar because with a mediocre movie just because it was his time.
Right, exactly.
He created a piece of art with this film.
Yeah, and he made time for himself.
Yeah. And it couldn't be denied.
Yeah. Exactly. So more or less, I mean, obviously it wasn't a front runner heading into the race as much. I mean, it did tie Howard's End with the most nominations at 9. So that usually is a forebear that it's at least in the hunt for Best Picture, clearly. But still, I think by the time it got to Oscar voters, that was probably the clear choice for them. So not exactly open and shut, but still very obvious that ultimately they're going to get
understandable after the fact.
Exactly. Yeah. So do you want to talk about some of these other movies in the Best Picture race? Because I have some thoughts.
All right.
About this lineup.
Let's talk about A Few Good Men in The Crying Game first.
Okay, good idea. Let's start positive.
Okay. A Few Good Men. Looking at it again, it's from a play, and it's from the Aaron Sorkin dialogue. You can figure out that it's from a play. It's
Yeah.
not exactly normal movie dialogue. Well,
And
Aaron
most
Sorkin's
Aaron
dialogue.
Sorkin movies are not, to
No.
be fair. But yes.
But I got to say, Rob Reiner did a really good job in opening it up. It doesn't visually, it doesn't feel like a play.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really love A Few Good Men, even though it does have, like you said, some unrealistic dialogue when it comes to everybody spouting these incredible fast-paced monologues as happens in every single Aaron Sorkin movie. But that really more or less started here, where he started building up, I think, more of a following for himself as kind of like this brand of Aaron Sorkinisms.
Yes.
Like I even noticed just watching it this week was the whole walk and talk thing that we always see in the West Wing. That was there, like all these elements were still there. Some not so great writing with women versus men, but I at least appreciate that it didn't end with them getting together in the end. So, with Demi Moore.
Yeah, I mean, for folks who really know this film only from using it, I want the truth, you can't handle the truth clip over and over and over again, which will live on forever.
Yeah,
it's a lot more than that.
It is.
I can't make an argument that it's a great film, but it's certainly a very respectable adaptation of a theatrical piece that might be a little stagey in someone else's hands, but in Reiner's hands, he really makes it a movie. And it also helps when you have Tom Cruise and Jack Nicholson.
Yeah, and Tom Cruise, I think this is another great Tom Cruise performance.
Yeah.
Demi Moore is solid. I don't think she's great, but
no, but he doesn't write. At this time in his life, he didn't write well for women.
Yeah,
he's much better in the West Wing.
Well, that's very much true.
Yeah,
but I was gonna say, like, I don't know if that's really the case either at this point in his career. I mean, the Newsroom, I didn't love the writing on that for women. Regardless,
yeah.
I do really like A Few Good Men. I have to say, even though I love Gene Hackman in Unforgiven, this is a very good Jack Nicholson performance.
It is. It's you might, if you only know the clip of "You Can't Handle the Truth," you might think it's a little hammy.
Yeah, fair.
But it's subtle all the way through. I mean, that's sort of the culmination of his character, that moment. And if you only see the culmination, you might think that, okay, this is overdone. Mm-hmm. But it's not. In context, it's very powerful.
It is, yeah. And I will have to say, this is a guy who has 3 Oscars. But I look at the terms of endearment when I'm like, maybe that should be for A Few Good Men. I don't know. I think he's good in terms of endearment, but if we're going to give him a supporting win, I think it would make sense for it to be for A Few Good Men, even though I would also probably just give it to Gene Hackman regardless. So the whole discussion is moot. But I still think it's a great kind of iconic kind of performance from him.
Yeah, and I think voters adored Terms of Endearment.
Well, yeah.
No one adores A Few Good Men. They respect it, and and many people like it a lot. But it's I can see why he didn't win for this.
Yeah, and the movie does not get in for director or most egregiously screenplay.
Yeah, surprising.
Which is like, how does that happen? I feel like it's a rejection almost.
Yeah, I mean, the two elements that stand the test of time, the screenplay and the direction of it, that's the strength of the film.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. It's odd, but very good film. It's a crowd pleaser, I think, by the end.
Yeah.
And I heard that it's going to be a play for NBC.
Yes, they're planning to do it live. It's interesting. Usually on the rare occasions we get a play that's filmed, it's come from Broadway with big notice. this never played Broadway. This was strictly a small off-Broadway play
Hmm.
that was then filmed, and that doesn't happen very often.
No. So I'll be interested to see if that happens. I heard
Yeah.
it was delayed to 2019. So,
Who's going to take on these iconic roles on NBC?
well, I heard it was going to be Alec Baldwin,
Okay,
presumably in the Jack Nicholson role.
I can see.
Yeah.
Yeah, I
So,
can. I thought you meant the Tom Cruise role. It's like,
oh,
what's wrong with you for that one?
like that is a interpretation. Okay. Yeah, but yeah. Let's move on to The Crying Game.
This is another film that people know now for just one thing, and I know this is a show of spoilers, and I'm not sure if I even want to talk about it. Let's say there's a revelation in the crime.
26 years old.
Yes. I suppose we're safe.
Yeah.
Let's just say that it's an amazing moment, particularly for those of us who saw it relatively early and didn't know what that moment was coming. It's up to you whether you want to talk about it or not.
Well, the thing is, I actually knew that that's what that character was, I should say, before the movie, before I saw it. So, because people had been talking about it so much that when I eventually watched it, it was like, okay, well, I already know what the character is, and it seems relatively obvious when you know what it is going into it, what it's going to end up being, you know? So
That's it's very interesting because because you knew, it was probably a very different experience watching it for you.
Yeah.
It was for me, who I hadn't known.
Right. Probably.
Because, you think this is a conventional romance, and, with Stephen Ray, who was not everybody knew, but was a known actor, and Jay Davidson, who nobody had seen before, but she seemed very pretty and was a very good actress, and that'd be fine. And then we realized that Jay Davidson is not an actress.
Right.
Yes.
An actor. Yeah. So watching it and seeing the reveal of the way that was done was a little bit off-putting to me, because it felt like it was just for shock value, which I think it was, obviously, to an audience. And I feel like it's almost played for the shock of like, oh God, how horrifying, that sort of thing.
Well, it was another time.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But, just watching it in a modern time, I think a movie like this would probably be criticized quite a bit with a lot of think pieces.
Probably. And if it was remade, it would probably be done very differently.
I would hope so. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I have to say, I really, really love Jay Davidson in the movie. I think that's a really special, unique performance, and I appreciate the Oscars for taking notice.
Yes, nominating Jay as Best Supporting Actor.
Yeah, and I almost wonder if, if people hadn't seen the movie and seen him in supporting actor, they would have been like, "Oh, that's interesting." And then watched it being like, oh, okay.
That's why he's the supporting actor.
Yeah. But I will say the movie itself, I think I really like the unconventional way that the story is told, because, if you don't necessarily know anything about it, the beginning third of the movie is very different from the last 2/3 of it, where it's just Stephen Ray and Forrest Whitaker, having this little bond together. And then it takes a big plot twist there, and Stephen Ray goes off and visits Jay Davidson, and everything unravels from there. And then the two storylines kind of intersect by the end. It's a very well-crafted screenplay that I understand why it won original screenplay. So
yeah,
even over the Best Picture winner, Unforgiven.
Yeah, we're talking a lot about the relationships in it, but it is against the background of the Troubles. As we say, I'm Irish, so I grew up with the Troubles.
Yeah.
So, Ray's character, Fergus, is a member of the IRA, and that's a slice of history that would occasionally be dramatized. I think it was Paul Greengrass's Bloody Sunday and a few other films, but there hasn't been a whole lot of play in terms of that particular background as a subject for a film. And it has a nice bit of grit to it that's just stirred in with all of the romantic stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But I think Jordan does a nice job for the time.
Yes.
This, I think, unfortunately, unlike Howard's End, is a dated film.
Yeah. Really kind of feels like it's 1992 watching it now.
Yeah.
But I mean, even like the music and some of the shots are very placed in the 90s. But I think the emotional elements are still something worth watching.
Yeah. So we have 4 worthwhile Best Picture candidates.
Yeah. And then also, oh wait, there's this other movie nominated, Scent of a Woman. Thoughts? Concerns?
I mean, I tried watching it again. I couldn't get past 10 minutes.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
It's just, oh, God, this is, talk about dated. But
yes.
I didn't much care for it then, but now it's kind of impossible to watch.
Yeah.
I mean, if you'd ask me, okay, what would you put in its place? My answer would be anything else. a high school hygiene film. That would be a better Best Picture candidate than this.
Yeah.
Let's just say it's big and it's long and it's very unentertaining.
Yeah. It is very long. It is like shockingly long. Like looking at the film itself and like looking at the plot elements of it, why is this over 2.5 hours? Like, does it really need to be this big epic? Like that's not what this story needs for it to be told.
It's an hour 50 in and out.
Yeah. Solid time. Watch Al Pacino ham it up. We're done.
Yeah.
But it's like even just watching it, like it gets to this point where Chris O'Donnell and Al Pacino are really confronting each other, and I'm like, oh, okay, this seems like the real climax of the film. This is going to be the real where it brings it all home. And then I looked at the clock, and it's like 40 minutes left. I'm like, okay,
right.
Yeah. And also we have to talk about the fact that Al Pacino finally wins an Oscar for this role, for this movie. Yeah. Not one of his most beloved performances among certain people. I mean, certain people do really love the movie. It's a crowd pleaser in a certain respect.
Yeah.
But yeah, this was a real case, I think, of we really messed up. We never gave Al Pacino an Oscar. Oh God, this is our opportunity. Here you go.
And which is crazy because he was nominated the same year as supporting actor for a legitimate film.
Yeah.
I'm not sure I want to talk too much about it, but the thing that stunned me the most is I went back to take a look at the details, and this has a higher Rotten Tomatoes rating than A Few Good Men.
Oh my God.
Yeah. 88% favorable. Now, it would be very interesting to see whether they would still get 88% favorable.
Probably not.
It wasn't good then, and it's really not good now, I didn't think.
Yeah. When I get to the end of the movie, I'm just like, what was really the point? Honestly, it's just like this thing about men and honor and friendship, and it's like, okay, sure, but
yeah, but even Pacino is not that good in it. He's just hammy and hoo-ah.
Oh God,
stop it.
Wanted to punch the screen after like the fourth one.
But I mean, this is the first real lemon we've had in a while in the Best Picture race.
Right.
The 90s were pretty good by and large.
Yeah. That's what I was going to say, is like, I've been talking week after week on the show about 96, great lineup, 95, very good, 94, very good, 93, awesome. And I get to this and I'm like, Okay, well, about that.
Well, then I'm glad I'm here.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to talk about here, but I did get a few questions about Scent of a Woman and Al Pacino. Lucky us. And this is from Ian Bulakalak, who says Al Pacino won his first Oscar for Scent of a Woman. Do you think he should have won earlier in his career for his work in the 70s, like The Godfather, Serpico, Dog Day Afternoon? Yes, yes, yes.
Yes.
That seems pretty obvious to me, honestly. I think
It's a better idea to give him an Oscar for one of his great performances.
yeah. Honestly, I love Dog Day Afternoon. I think that would have been a great movie for him to win with.
Adore that movie.
If it wasn't The Godfather, absolutely.
Yeah.
Um,
After the first two Godfathers and not getting an Oscar for it, this would have been the perfect time, the perfect role.
I think so. Yeah. And do you think there was any competition for him from these other nominees ultimately? Because we have Robert Downey Jr. and Chaplin as Charlie Chaplin, Clint Eastwood in Unforgiven, Stephen Ray in The Crying Game, and of course the one everyone talks about, Denzel Washington in Malcolm X.
Yes. And well, if the question came, what would you replace Son of a Woman with? One of the ones I certainly would consider would be Spike Lee's Malcolm X.
Right.
And it's a big film. It's way too long. It's 3 hours and 22 minutes. This was a year of a lot of long movies.
Yep.
But it's a towering performance. It really does. And certainly in this field, it's the cream of the crop. I liked Eastwood's very interior take in Unforgiven, but it's not the kind of performances that win Oscars. And a lot of what Washington does in Malcolm X is interior, but he has enough big moments that it certainly could easily have been justified. It's a Oscar-winning performance, and now he has two now. He had one before this for Glory, but it's really kind of stunning, the detail and the emotional impact that he manages to channel in Malcolm X.
Yeah. But the thing with Malcolm X is that Spike Lee, period. He has made a lot of statements, of course, anti-establishment statements, a lot of statements, especially at this time, that made him a little bit too dangerous, honestly, is probably the word, for Academy voters to really appreciate his movies. And we'll see what happens with BlacKkKlansman this year. I'm hopeful for it, but I'm still a little cautious about it. He does have an honorary Oscar now, which is great, but
it's not the same for him, I'm sure.
It's not. It's definitely not. Come on now.
But I don't know about you, but I'm watching Spike Lee beginning to campaign.
Yep.
BlacKkKlansman, and he wants this. I think he wants this nomination, and he's playing the ball game.
Oh yeah, he's playing ball. We'll see if he continues that way, like all the way through February.
Yeah.
But from what I'm seeing, he's lined up pretty well. You know, so I'm hopeful for it, and it still boggles my mind that would be his first nomination for director. Like, how do we let that pass by? After all these years.
But unlike giving Pacino his first Oscar for Scent of a Woman, the first nomination for BlacKkKlansman is earned.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
So Malcolm X would be one of the films I think that should be considered as a replacement for Scent of a Woman.
For sure.
Weekend Brothers.
Yeah.
Another one would be another Al Pacino film. The very same year, but one that I think lives on a little bit more.
For sure.
The film version of David Mamet's Glengarry Glen Ross, with a devastating cast: Al Pacino, Jack Lemmon, Alec Baldwin, Ed Harris, Alan Arkin, Jonathan Pryce. I mean, amazing people.
All the veteran actors you respect, basically, are in this movie.
Yeah, actors with a capital A.
Right.
And this was just a filthy delight from beginning to end. Impeccably acted, very, very well directed by James Foley.
Mhm.
And the Mammoth dialogue couldn't be more different than Aaron Sorkin's dialogue. Really, rather than being flowery like Sorkin, Mammoth is punchy, and and he hits you in the gut whenever he can. It's a small film, it only runs 100 minutes, but it packs much more punch than most of the other contenders that year.
Yeah.
And one that is, people still talk about.
Mm-hmm.
Another film I'd like to propose for a potential fifth slot that year is Aladdin.
Yes.
It came after Beauty and the Beast. This is before we had the animated film category. But I think it is a career best performance from Robin Williams.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. I mean, yes, there's the prejudice of giving voiceover artists an Oscar, but plus the songs are great.
Songs are so good.
Yeah, the screenplay is really sharp. Some real laughs in it, and there's a romance. It really had everything, and people still love it to this day.
Yeah, I still love it. It's one of the best of the Renaissance.
Yeah,
for sure.
And the film I would probably choose to take that fifth slot, because I think it deserves it, is Robert Altman's The Player. And just look at the Best Director nominees that year, and there's Robert Altman.
Yep.
And it won the Golden Globe for Best Picture, and also it received a few other nominations, Oscar nominations.
Mm-hmm.
But the big one, surprisingly, it didn't happen. And it really was, looking back on it, it's the best reviewed film of the year. It's still to this day almost perfect on Rotten Tomatoes. It's 98%, and it has a life of its own. And it came at a time in Altman's career when he was done.
Mm-hmm.
He after a wedding in 1979. The 80s were really a tough period for him. I mean, he wound up doing filmed stage plays, basically. He got a lot of respect in the late 80s for his Vincent van Gogh film, Vincent and Theo, with Tim Roth. It was like, oh my gosh, he still has it. But it didn't quite make it with audiences. And I had heard rumblings that he was doing a Hollywood picture, but I wasn't prepared for the star power in The Player. Almost every Academy voter is probably in it.
Yeah. And I do wonder if, since it does kind of satirize the movie business, maybe if it hit a little too close to home.
Maybe.
When it came to Best Picture. I don't know.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Hollywood likes it when they're celebrated.
Yeah.
And not when they're knifed up a little bit.
Like, oh, yeah, this is a little ugly.
That's true, but I don't want anybody else to see. No.
Right. Yes.
But I mean, certainly the Best Director nomination was warranted. There is, if you haven't seen the film, a 7-minute, 47-second opening scene. No cuts, no cheats. It really is almost 8 minutes of just one continuous shot from office to office to office to office. And that was like, uh-oh, he's back. And he is back in this. Just between the awards it received along the way, the precursors, and just the quality of the film, I think that would be a much more honorable fifth slot.
Yes.
1992 Oscar nominees.
Absolutely. Yeah, you make a good case for all of those. I think The Player was probably sixth, I would imagine.
Yeah.
Based on director and screenplay and film editing,
Yes.
So yeah, those are obviously very, very important ones to have.
Yeah, they're all Best Picture precursors.
Yeah. So, well, this is actually a good transition point, I suppose, to get into our should have been a contender segment. You already laid out some of the ones that you are clearly a big fan of. But these are other movies that were nominated for other Oscars or movies completely ignored by the Academy that came out in 1992. I will definitely co-sign Aladdin, which was the #1 movie of the year by a long shot. And I too love the songs. I too love Robin Williams. It's a really unique little story, so visually sumptuous, so unique in the Disney canon. And yeah, it's just a really fun movie to rewatch again and again. I will also go to another kind of sort of family friendly movie, but also in some ways not really that family friendly. That was a big hit in 1992, and that was Batman Returns. So Tim Burton has an interesting interpretation of Batman with the original Batman from '89 and now Returns. The Penguin is very disturbing.
Very disturbing.
So that's why I say maybe not so family friendly, but really a great performance from Danny DeVito, I must say.
Yes.
And maybe in certain ways would make my lineup for supporting actor just for the sheer commitment to that role that he had.
Yes.
But also Michelle Pfeiffer is just like iconic as well as Catwoman. Very sexy, very slinky, very alluring, but also has an interesting character to what could easily just be a very thin paperback comic character. Provides some depth to it, which I like. And Michael Keaton remains to be such an odd choice for Batman that still kind of sort of works for me.
It's very distinctive looking back about how other people have done a similar take, but Keaton's was different.
Yeah.
And in that sense, I could, it really kind of, I smile when I think of it.
Yeah. Yeah, just a really very dark movie. And yeah, and it's another, I think it's probably my favorite of any of the 90s Batman movies. Mm-hmm. So another one that is a favorite in my family that probably wasn't anywhere near the Oscar race, let's be real, is Wayne's World.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah, huge favorite for my family growing up. We watched it all the time. We quote it all the time.
And going into it, when I heard there was going to be a Wayne's World movie, I thought, 2 hours of this?
Exactly.
But it was delightful. It was really wonderful.
So sharp.
Great.
Yeah, so sharp, so funny.
Yeah.
I love Tia Carrere in that movie. I love Rob Lowe is just ridiculous in that movie. And, Mike Myers and Dana Carvey, all really fun. And yeah, that's one of those movies there. If it's on cable, I'll just sit there and watch it because it's amazing. But as far as quote unquote more prestigious pictures, I will note that this is the beginning of Quentin Tarantino with Reservoir Dogs.
Yes.
So that is obviously very noteworthy. It feels very much like a first film, I think a lot of people might say.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's rough around the edges at times.
Yeah.
But it really automatically just shows Quentin Tarantino's cleverness and his character work and his violence. Obviously, it's
right.
All of the trademarks of Quentin Tarantino are all there with his first big break here,
and also his use of music.
Yes, exactly.
And mixing music and violence together, it makes for a very effective mix.
Exactly. Yeah. And I will also give note to a movie that was booed at the time by a certain crowd and also cheered on by others. And that movie is Twin Peaks: Fire Walk with Me.
It was booed
by Cannes audiences. Yeah. What did you ever see Fire Walk with Me?
I did. I did.
Okay.
I would probably like to see it again because by that time I was sort of done with Twin Peaks,
Right.
and I was like, okay, all right, enough. But in subsequent years, I've heard enough people, yourself among them, who said, no, this really is good. And
Yeah.
I should give it another chance. And I'm always willing to give movies another chance.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is another one that like starts off, the first 30 minutes of it where it's like with Kiefer Sutherland and a random like detective case, and it's just like, what does this have to do with anything? And then it goes into the prequel of how Laura Palmer ends up obviously going towards the dark side more or less, and ends up getting killed. And it's a very, 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 very tragic story. It's so upsetting to watch on a visceral level. I think just because it's so heartbreaking, because you know where all of this is going and you know that there's no way of stopping it. And she's just going to continue to be drawn to this evil force.
Yeah.
And I have to say, Cheryl Lee in that movie would definitely make my lineup for Best Actress. I think that's one of the best performances of the 90s, honestly. She is filled with that sense of optimism that a teenage girl would be, and also that other side of a teenage girl that is curious about adulthood and is drawn towards some of those evil forces. And when she gets into them, she really just goes full force into that entire world. And it's just so devastating to watch. And also the music is amazing from Angelo Badalamenti, and even some of the original songs for the movie are so haunting. And David Lynch, he's a master, at least in my eyes.
One thing I do remember very well is Cheryl Lee's performance is she never gave you an inkling that Laura Palmer knew what her fate was going to be. She lived in the moment. And that I really appreciated, because it does, that feeling that you had said about knowing what's going to happen, eventually happen to her, does cast, I don't want to say appall, but it does, it's disturbing.
It is.
Because you're really hoping this girl is going to get out of it, and she can't.
Right. Yeah. Well said. And Ray Wise is very good as well. I have to say, Ray Wise is someone I have hoped for a long time would get a big supporting actor sort of break at some point in his career, but has never seemed to materialize in that way. But he's wonderful.
Yeah.
So let's just get to a few other questions. I don't know if you had other movies that you wanted to talk about first, but
no, I think we've covered 92 pretty well.
Yeah.
I hope so.
But there's a few little notables here, little oddities from the race, including Marissa Tomei. That win for My Cousin Vinny. She was the only nomination for My Cousin Vinny. I don't think she really got any precursors for wins or even nominations. So she was going into the race having not won anything. She was the only American in the race,
which I thought was key.
Yes. Yeah, perhaps very important. But it's also a comedy performance, and it is a broad comedy performance, I think, But I mean, it's a good character, Mona Lisa. She's fascinating to watch. Yeah, but
and she's had a number of nominations since.
Yeah.
So she clearly is, she's a tested actress.
She is. She's amazing. Yeah. But Cody Derricks just said, Marissa Tomei, go. Well, we should talk about what happens at the Oscars, which is Jack Palance announcing Marissa Tomei as the winner. This led to many people making these weird conspiracy theories about how maybe Jack Palance read the wrong name, which seemed very disrespectful, honestly, to Marissa Tomei.
Yeah. Initially, when I heard those conspiracy things, I said, well, how could anyone ever read the wrong name out of the envelope? Well, we found out last year.
Yeah. Oops.
But yeah, I just that must have been a hellish year for her because a year that what should have been a triumph, all this gossip around it, it was just sad to see. But she rallied. God love her. She carved out a very, very good career.
She really did. Yeah, she racked up quite a few supporting actress nominations, and yeah, I think she's great. But I will also note that I would not have minded looking at that race if Vanessa Redgrave had won.
No, particularly seeing her again.
Going back to Howard's End, it is a really classic supporting performance for me, where it got to a certain point after she was gone where I was like, I miss her scenes, I miss that relationship.
Yeah, and that's a signal of a really good supporting performance.
Yeah, one of her best, absolutely. So there's one other thing from this year that Andrew Carden wanted to bring up. Our old pal Andrew Carden.
Yeah.
He said, I find it perplexing that A League of Their Own, despite warm reviews and strong box office, never much factored into the Oscar conversation. Why do you think this was the case, and do you think it deserved any recognition?
I think the key phrase in that is warm reviews, because that's what it got. It got warm reviews, and
not hot reviews.
Yeah. I mean, it probably, if anybody would have gotten the nomination, would be Tom Hanks, ironically enough. But yeah, I think the reviews were really kind. Not kind, because that means it's probably but they were warm. That's a good way of doing it, I guess. But that's not enough. That wasn't enough that particular year. It was as we had said, an unpredictable year.
Yeah.
There were at least, the among some of the films you mentioned, some of the films I mentioned, a lot of better reviewed films that would play, could have been in the mix more. So I think people still love the film.
Oh, yeah.
I haven't seen it in a long time, but boy, I would like to see it again.
Yeah.
But it's a good question.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Maybe there could have been a case for Gina Davis, who gets a Golden Globe nomination. Some of the songs, I think, are notable. They also get some attention ahead of time, including Carole King, Now and Forever, and then Madonna herself, This Used to Be My Playground. Both of those songs kind of get some precursor noms. I wouldn't have minded either one of the songs in the original song lineup, even though, by the way, that song lineup is full of bangers.
Yeah.
We've got Friend Like Me and A Whole New World from Aladdin, and from The Bodyguard we have I Have Nothing and Run to You.
Yeah.
We also have to have this other song, Beautiful Maria of My Soul, from the Mambo Kings. Maybe I would have kicked it out, to be honest. Yeah. But
sorry, Mambo Kings.
Yeah, they're fine. Regardless, it's good. I mean, I get the question because I think it is, again, kind of a crowd pleaser. It made a lot of money. It did well. It's directed by Penny Marshall, who just 2 years earlier had done Awakenings, which was obviously a Best Picture nominee, was very beloved. But yeah, I just think probably a little bit of genre, and perhaps, since we know the Oscars very well, maybe a little too female. So just little factors like that.
Yeah, and it any one of those could have been enough to put it in the lower category.
Yeah. So that's pretty much all I have. There's a lot of interesting little blockbusters, like we mentioned, along the way, and there's also a lot of interesting critically acclaimed movies. The one thing I wanted to talk about before we move on to the last segment is just a little Oscar footnote here that we have this year in the foreign language film category, because we have another situation where a nomination was revoked. Yes, because A Place in the World from Uruguay was nominated, and then it wasn't nominated because, according to the official Academy website, this is what they say. They say, after nominations were announced, information came to light that showed that this film was wholly produced in Argentina and had insufficient Uruguayan artistic control. The film was declared ineligible and removed from the final ballot.
Well, and we're all the poorer for it.
Aren't we? Yes. I always find it a little bit funny, again, in a dark way, that when nominations get revoked for various reasons.
Yeah.
But what are you going to do?
Apropos of nothing, the Academy shouldn't be bothered with popular film. They should fix the categories they have, especially this one.
Yes, let's work on the internal, like the categories themselves first. How about let's boost makeup to 5 nominees, for God's sake?
Or add casting or stunts.
Yes. Yeah. Both of which, I mean, especially stunts would probably help boost the show a little bit.
Yeah, you'd get Mission Impossible Fallout. Yeah, definitely.
And presumably, since Tom Cruise does all his own stunts, maybe Tom Cruise will get an Oscar. Anyway, so on that note, let us move on to our final segment, because when we come back, we'll be talking about whether we think Unforgiven deserved to win Best Picture 26 years later, or if Howard's End maybe deserved it.
For Best Picture, the nominees are The Crying Game, Stephen Woolley, producer. A Few Good Men, David Brown, Rob Reiner, Andrew Scheinman, producers. Howard's End, Ismail Merchant, producer. Scent of a Woman, Martin Brest, producer. Unforgiven, Clint Eastwood, producer. And the Oscar for the Best Picture of 1992 goes to Clint Eastwood. Unforgiven,
And we're back. So now we're going to give our verdict as to whether Unforgiven deserved that Best Picture win, or if we think Howard's End really deserved it. Tom O'Brien, what is your verdict?
Well, I have to confess to a prejudice that I am a huge fan of classic Westerns. I think both films deserved to win, but I think they made the right choice with Unforgiven.
Mm-hmm.
And I can't say one over the other. They're so different. I saw Howard's End and it was just transfixed by the whole thing. And then I saw Unforgiven, and it's sort of like, okay, top that. And it did, or at least for me, it rang a lot of bells of things that I really appreciate in the classic Western. And he covered all of them, but with new eyes. And it's one of the few times, I'd say maybe about 4 or 5 in the last 25 years, that my favorite film of the year actually won Best Picture.
Oh, wow.
So
that's really cool.
I'm going to go with Unforgiven, but boy, I took a very, very great second look at Howard's End and really appreciate it even more.
That's great. Yeah, I will agree that I really love both of these movies for very different reasons. It's very much a case of apples and oranges, which this whole thing is, but especially when you look at these two movies, that is certainly the case. But I do tend to gravitate more towards movies like Howard's End, ultimately, but I would still actually give it to Unforgiven. That's what I'll say. I think it's a movie that, elevates its genre, makes it look inward.
Yes.
And is full of amazing layered performances, shades of gray, as I mentioned, and is very complex, deceptively complex for what seems like a simple story, and does its job very well. It is a movie of its genre that is probably near the top of its genre.
Yes.
And for that, I do think that is worth rewarding. And I think Howard's End is also towards the top of its genre. It is not just a stuffy costume, boring affair that you might think it might be if you haven't seen it. It is full of rich characters, emotional performances, but ultimately I lean more towards Unforgiven.
All right.
So there you have it. Whew. So thank you again, Tom, for another rousing discussion.
Thanks, Kevin. That was such fun.
And tell everyone where they can find you all over the internet.
Okay. For Oscar news, I'm at goldderby.com. For film reviews, I'm at my own website, exactchange.com. For Oscar podcasts, I am at nextbestpicture.com. And you can find me on Twitter at Thomas E. O'Brien.
Look at you.
Oh, shucks.
And you can find me on Twitter at Kevin_Jacobsen. And you can find the show at Oscar Runner Up. The show is on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and Stitcher, and Google Play. And you can rate, review, and subscribe. And now I turn it to you because I'm very curious as to whether you think Unforgiven or Howard's End was better. And you can do that at my website at filmtrophies.com, or you can email me at filmtrophies@gmail.com. So once again, thank you, Tom.
Oh, thank you, Kevin. That was good.
And I will bid you all adieu.